I'm Eric Kingsley, Innovative Natural Resource Solutions, and it's my pleasure to introduce a friend, colleague here from the great state of Montana, Craig Rawlings. Craig's with Forest Business Network.
Wanted to just kind of hit the game changers and significant events that, from my perspective, what I've seen in particularly since 2000. Nothing new to you guys, pulp and paper mill permanent closures, sawmill closures and consolidation that hits the northeast, southeast, northwest, all over. Catastrophic wildfires. The guys at dinner last night told me in Maine there's not enough gallons of diesel to start a 15-acre forest fire. It's really difficult here, so that one doesn't really apply. Beetle epidemics, they seem to be hitting everywhere, and some areas a lot stronger than others. And then federal agencies, the further you go west, where they went from kind of the shift away from commercial timber harvest. The recession that hit us all, that was probably, the worst one, and, any of us that, even older guys like me, have ever seen, was probably one of the most unique ones. Talking to a lot of the sawmill guys around the country, it said it was so different. It was the first downturn in an economy they ever saw where they actually couldn't sell a board at some price. Usually before any other downturn in the economy, they could keep lowering the price and, they could deplete inventory and go through curtailment and survive it. But this one was so unique where they couldn't sell any of their inventory for almost a year there. You guys talked about it earlier, but biomass is not on a level field with wind and solar. So that puts us at a disadvantage trying to promote wood energy, although you guys have some success stories here in Maine. Talking to Jimmy last night about our new plant, and of course, I'm just going to talk about that later. Some other game changers and good ones. Europe's renewable energy mandates created a huge export market for pellets out of the U.S. Low energy prices, well, there's some that are good and there's some bad when you talk about biomass. I mean, the lower the energy prices because of natural gas, wind and solar, oil prices dropping, that's makes it more competitive and more challenging for biomass, but almost everybody that's in the biomass industry, at least from the mill manufacturing side, energy prices and their bills are so significant to their operation. Having those lower energy prices is a good thing, and it's a good thing for the public. So there's kind of a conundrum there that everybody tries to work through on how do you manage and deal with that. I've got 3 points up here, the last 3 points that I think, to me, particularly mass timber, one of the biggest game changers I've seen out there. I think most of you are familiar with the Softwood Lumber Board, the checkoff program that has been in place and is out there to educate the public on the benefits and the markets for lumber. Where they've got their advertising campaigns have actually gained a 5% market share in a market that we've never been in our industry that I can ever remember, and that's in buildings taller than 6 stories. So that was quite a success story, and I think hopefully the checkoff program will continue, and there will be that pool of marketing dollars to advance our industry. I won't talk any more about mass timber because Russell's going to give you a detailed report on that here in a bit. But 2 other things, and I will focus a little bit on those and why I have them on the list here. One of them is legalized marijuana. I just was shocked when I started doing a little bit of research and I started fielding calls here in the last year where people, entrepreneurs, are starting to get more interest in biochar and soil amendments. I'm asking them why, and they said, well, there's this new emerging industry coming on, and there's this big demand for high quality products, and especially in the states like I noticed on this map I'm going to show you in a minute, that Maine's one of those on there. And then biojet fuel from forest biomass. I mentioned the Northwest Advanced Renewables Alliance we were involved with for the last 5 years. I want to touch on that a little bit because I think that's going to be a big game changer. And these last 2 things, that slide and this slide, I'll spend a few more minutes on, and then just kind of open it up for some of your input and discussion and questions and answers. But I've been accused of being a serial entrepreneur, but I'm in a recovering one now just because of my age. I've kind of slowed down. I'm more of the coach for the entrepreneurial world and an advisor. But when you look at this map and you look at the amount of states and large populated states that are legalizing marijuana for medical and recreational use, again, if I was back in my serial entrepreneur days, I'd be taking a hard look at organic material that could fit into that marketplace. These smaller grower operations, they're going to be not afraid to pay the price to buy products. And if you do the math, I didn't, but $48 for a cubic foot, translated all the way back to a truckload of chips, pretty good money in there. So it's something I think we all ought to take a close look, whether we agree with the concept, whether it ought to be legalized or not, that's another thing. But from an entrepreneurial opportunity, I think, fairly low CapEx cost to go into the biochar or other types of conversion technologies out there and to put in a small bagging line, hire a marketing company, design your bags, and start selling this. One of the other things that are interesting to me, talking to some of the Scots people, that whole company, it's a large international company, publicly traded, and they're investing just millions and millions in organics because of this market we're looking at on that slide. Enough said about that one. I want to talk about the project I mentioned earlier, the Northwest Advanced Renewables Alliance. Like I mentioned, they got a great website, narrenewables.org. Basically lays out everything it takes to build a supply chain to go out in the woods, get logging / in-woods biomass, and convert it to a liquid fuel, drop-in fuel for the airlines. And it hasn't taken off to where anybody's jumped into that marketplace and built a refinery yet, but there's some important information on this slide. Again, I mentioned earlier that $40 million was invested, 63 principal investigators studying this in like 17 states. These experts worked on it. Out of the 63, there were 62 PhDs. I was the only non-PhD guy there trying to keep them all organized. But anyway, some of the important things on this slide were, right in the middle of that slide is certification. Shocked me when I found out it cost $100 million, between $50 and $100 million to get an ASTM certified fuel from any feedstock or source. It has to be able to drop into any aircraft engine in the world, and that certification, like I said, $50 to $100 million. It wasn't one of the deliverables of this grant and this research to get that certification, but one of their main partners, their name's up there, is Gevo, a small publicly traded company that they worked really hard. They ended up getting the certification. So between the research and the money that Gevo put in, there was certification. The next thing that happened, was not a part of the deliverables of the grant, was that to fly a transcontinental flight across the United States with this drop-in fuel, in which they did last November, October, with a 20% blend. I was on that Alaska flight. It was regularly scheduled. It was really cool. Got to fly out of Seattle, fly to Washington, D.C. Secretary Vilsack met us at the plane, took us out on the ramp for a photo op, made all kinds of headlines. I think the interesting point here, again, if I was back in my serial entrepreneur days, I'd be looking at, maybe if I was here in Maine, I might be calling up Gevo, the organizers and the management of the NARA, and talk to them about how that might fit in here with a state that's really working to, and a region, looking to look at the biomass issues and an opportunity to move it forward. The other interesting thing is you look at that Alaska Airlines, they're not the only one. Every airline, the engine manufacturers, Boeing, they were all part of this study. They want it to happen. They're using, corn-based ethanol right now. They're trying to get off of that as fast as they can and they don't want to be putting food in fuel tanks. And so I think there's some real opportunity. And again, taking a look at all this, There's a roadmap laying out there with that study. I encourage you to take a look at it. Thank you very much for inviting me again. I really appreciate it.